Hi, welcome to Wildlife Winter Adaptations for Survival. I'm Jacob. Uh, One reason I wanted to do this class today was because I know a lot of us, and definitely myself included, have this tendency to look at winter as just cold and dead. Um, you think about going outside and you think that'll be physically painful, and it'll probably just be kind of brown and gray, and you won't see anything. You kind of wonder how anything's surviving out there. Uh, So I wanted to do this class today to kind of point out some of the more interesting and unique aspects of winter to make you maybe a little more motivated to actually go outside and try to brave that cold. Uh, for one thing, it is completely different looking than any time of year. Uh, Really, just the grays and the browns you're not going to get in the same way. It's also extremely quiet in a way that it isn't at any other time of year. It's just peaceful. And sometimes you get snow, which I personally like, and that just makes it more quiet, more nice. So you have those things, and then you have these special adaptations that animals have to be able to survive in the harsh conditions, which we're going to talk about today. And it really just makes it unique and sort of an interesting time. And hopefully, it'll make you guys want to go outside and maybe experience it a little bit more. Before we get into everything, though, I'm going to say a little bit about me. Uh, I have a bachelor's in wildlife conservation from Virginia Tech. I worked in forestry research in Utah and owl surveying in Virginia. I did work on a reserve in South Africa. It was incredible. Uh, Also, while in South Africa, I taught some kids about conservation in the local school there, and I've taught kids about wildlife and everything here. Uh, I'm also currently in the Virginia Master Naturalist class. I know a lot of people here probably are familiar with that. I'm also an instructor and facility supervisor at Banshee Reeks Nature Preserve, and clearly, I'm an aspiring plant model. If you have any questions after this or just want to talk about anything, you can go ahead and email me. Put my email there at the bottom, and let's get started. Uh, the one thing I wanted to make clear while we're going through this is that we're focusing today on adaptation, and that is a different concept than evolution. While the two go hand in hand a lot of the time, and you don't really have to be too focused on the differences and the semantics there, but I do want to make it clear that they are two separate concepts and that we will be focusing on adaptation today. Evolution, on the other hand, is inevitable change developed over generations, and by generations I mean oftentimes millions of years. It is really a big picture thing, and one thing to focus on and to kind of recognize actually is that it's not purposeful. This was oftentimes a gene that just happened to change and just happened to make an organism more likely to survive. Adaptation, on the other hand, is generally purposeful because it's a mechanism that allows organisms to adjust to their environment, which oftentimes that environment is changing frequently. So that adaptation is pretty big in terms of that animal's survival. Uh, that can be long term or short term. It really just depends on the necessity for it and the ability for that organism to change. Like I said, they will be pretty hand in hand a lot of the time, but it is important to recognize that there is a difference. And adaptation is what we're really looking at today. One way to kind of think about it, to help you think about it, is just in terms of humanity. Evolution, we evolved to be bipedal. We have two legs that we use to stand and walk around. And if we were to have to adapt to something, maybe be, we moved from Los Angeles to New York, we have to wear jackets a little bit more often, or if we moved from a city to a farm, we have to develop some calluses, maybe get used to waking up earlier, things like that. You'd have to just adapt to that new situation, to that new environment. Uh, so today, for the rest of the talk, I wanted to point out just three of the main survival tactics that a lot of animals use in winter, just across the board. Uh, First, we have migration, and hibernation, and persistence. Uh, and then I wanted to point out some of the ways that you can recognize an animal's presence, even if you can't see it, because oftentimes animals are nocturnal, and then in winter, you're even less likely to see them because they are oftentimes off and sleeping and just trying to preserve a little bit of energy. So you can use tracks and different signs that I will show you later to really recognize that they were there in the first place and see what they were doing without actually being able to see them in person. First off, we have migration, and that is the movement of species to more agreeable places in winter. This is because, simply put, it is physically difficult to survive in winter. It is painful, they could die. And you lose a lot of different resources in winter. Just food is the main one. So a lot of times, birds and bats, because they can fly, it's a lot easier for them to move around great distances, will simply move more south in this case. And that is just because the closer they get to the equator, the warmer it'll be, and the more tropical it'll be. And in those places, it has more food year round, and it's just easier for them to survive overall. So instead of trying to hunker down and grit and bear it, essentially, they just move to places where they can survive easier for the winter and then move back. This is seen mostly in South American and Caribbean, as I said, because those are just closer to the equator and they have more tropical climates a lot of the time. Some species are from farther up north in Canada, and they will migrate down to not quite as close to the equator, so closer to around Virginia, say. And there's not many of them because those are from much, much harsher climates. But we do see a few of those species here, so what that means is that we will gain and lose some species in winter, but the vast majority of the species that we'll see we will lose. The main reason for animals doing this is just to follow the food. In Texas, for instance, different insects will kind of pop up in swarms, and you'll get a lot of bats going to that area. And in doing so, they end up following the weather because insects will be more likely to pop up when the weather is warmer. This map down to the side here, that is just a general overview of what the typical migration map will look like. It's not for every single bird, it's not for every single bat, anything like that, but that's typically what you'll look at, with the orange up top there being where they'll spend their spring and their warmer months. That's what they'll breed, everything like that. The yellow is where you'll only see them passing through a few times a year. And then the blue there is winter. And that's generally, as I said, in the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, places like that. And that's where, as I said, they'll only spend their winter. Now, in some places, you'll have species that are a little more northern dwelling, even farther up, a bit more Arctic, and they will spend their winters in a slightly less southern areas. So in that case, we do get a couple birds that will spend their winters here, as we do have more mild winters than a lot of places up north and in the mountains, especially here in the Piedmont. I'm sure many of you have noticed that you can barely get summer, you can barely get snow sometimes, and maybe 35 is about where you cap for cold. So what this means is that we will gain and lose some species in winter. Most of the time, we'll be losing most of the species, but there are a couple that will travel from up north and stay here. Ultimately, though, any of these species will just be following food, and in doing so, follow the weather. Some local examples of this, some of the birds that come, there's not a ton, as I mentioned, but there's a northern saw-whet owl that is not very likely to see, but I had to include it because look at its little face. It's adorable. And if you happen to be up in the mountains or something like that, and somehow you see one of them or even hear one of them because they make these little beeps, again, they're fantastic. It'll be a great day. But what you do see often are dark-eyed juncos, and this was one right here. You can notice its little gray top there with a little kind of light beak. Once you notice them, you will see them everywhere. They're very common here in the winter. They like to spend most of their time kind of on the ground with sparrows and things like that, and they're common at bird feeders. Like I said, once you notice them, you will see them constantly here. Now some of the birds that go, it's a blue heron, there we go, blue heron over here, great egret, the white ones. They'll tend to kind of migrate through. You'll see blue herons pretty late into the season. Some of them will actually stick around here, but generally they will migrate farther south. Great egrets, you'll generally just see them sort of moving through in fall. Then you have a tree and barn swallows, yellow warbler, indigo bunting, and the list goes on for quite a while. Then when it comes to bats, we get kind of interesting here because if the top three bats, the little brown bat, Indiana, and tricolor, they sort of half migrate and half hibernate. So from here, they'll migrate a couple 100 miles up into the mountains to find a cave to hibernate. So they sort of migrate, but generally they just kind of leave the area. Then you have the red, hoary, and silver-haired bats, and this right here is a hoary, also pretty cool looking bat. And these, sort of like the great egret, you'll just see them flying through. They'll just come through the area, but they do migrate down to Mexico and Texas and things like that. Then we have a few overachievers, and these are not at all local, but they are definitely worth mentioning. We have the Arctic tern, and that has the largest migration of any animal. It goes about 25,000 miles each year from pole to pole. If you look over here, you can see its migration patterns where they actually strapped very small GPS units to the back of a couple birds and have been getting data that way. And that kind of data collection has actually been getting much better as they go. So we're learning more about them each year. It's incredible. If you look at it, this is a post-breeding. I go down in this green here. You can kind of switch it up. And this red is where they winter. And then yellow, they go back up to their breeding grounds up there. And once again, this is simply to follow the food. In their case, it's kind of small fish. One interesting thing, they actually, as they're flying along, as they migrate, they will actually follow schools of larger predatory fish that will kind of spook some of the smaller fish up to the surface, and they'll prey on those to do it. So it's an interesting thing about them, but they are very cool. This is one up here. It's a little guy, unassuming, but incredible. Then you have the caribou, also known as reindeer in Canada, and they have the largest terrestrial migration of any animal. Can be up to 800 miles a year. It's 400 either way. And the interesting thing about this is that can change depending on the size of the herd. So the bigger the herd, the more they'll move around. This is because, if you have a large herd, they're going to go through resources a little quicker, and they're going to have to move just to find new ones. Another interesting thing about caribou is that opposite to a lot of the reasons that animals will migrate, they still do migrate because of food and predation and everything like that. But one thing is they actually leave their warm area on purpose because they're very well adapted to cold. And in some of the warmer spots, when it starts to warm up in summer, the mosquitoes and different insects will actually increase in that area and will increase the amount of disease in that area. So to get more comfortable and away from the disease, they'll actually move out of that area because of the heat. The heat is the problem for them. So it's a pretty interesting thing about caribou. Again, also known as reindeer. And same with the Arctic tern. Again, people are learning more every year and looking at different ways to manage them because humans have been influencing their migration greatly. So past that, we have hibernation. This one's pretty well known. Another thing I wanted to sort of clear up is that there's a difference between hibernation and torpor. So torpor sort of makes up hibernation, is a state where they kind of drop their metabolic rate and essentially just shut down their bodies to save energy. Hibernation is this, but for much longer periods of time. So, so it can last up to months. And one thing a lot of people like to note is there's a difference between just hibernation and true hibernation, and that one again will be much longer, and they will be much harder to wake up. It'll be very important that you don't wake them up. Torpor, in the case of bats and many things, can be used on purpose to actually save energy and just kind of protect themselves from predators sometimes if they don't want to leave a roost because there are too many predators. Well, you don't have to if you've completely shut down. There's also a version of hibernation for cold-blooded animals, mostly reptiles and amphibians, called brumation. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But yeah, when it comes to hibernation and everything, though, this involves temperature drop. They don't eat, they don't defecate. They mainly sleep in their dens, and they really just do everything possible to avoid using the energy that they can replace. And it's a pretty common thing to see, but down here, we do have pretty mild winters. So a lot of the time you will still see the animals that are hibernating, at least a little bit. You will see them up and about periodically on warmer days because we do have warmer days. So again, some local examples of this. You have deep hibernation, you have woodchucks. This one, deep hibernation or true hibernation, has been said that nothing really over the size of a beaver will truly hibernate. It's kind of an interesting little fun fact there. So you get woodchucks. Those are known to be one of the only like true hibernators a lot of the time. And woodchucks, interestingly, they also known as groundhogs, by the way. I know that gets a lot of people. Yeah, me too. But woodchucks, they'll go from October to about March and April. They'll gain a lot of body fat and then lose about half of it by the time they leave hibernation. They'll drop their body temperature to about 35 degrees, and their heart rate to about 4 to 10 beats per minute, and they'll take one breath every 6 minutes. So really, they pretty nearly shut down. They also will go into hibernation in different dens than they've been living in the rest of the year. They'll go generally off into the woods, make a den that goes below the frost line and sort of stays a little bit warmer and at a constant temperature during the winter, and they'll just hole up in there. Then you have big-eared bats, little brown bats, Indiana bat, tricolor bat. Again, they all hibernate. It's very important. If any of you are cavers and you see a bat in the winter, don't wake it up. Very important that they don't get woken up because they can't replace the energy that they've lost by waking up during there. That is actually the problem with white nose syndrome, is that it will get on them. Little fungus will get on them, and they will wake up during winter. They'll go out, they'll fly around, and then they'll just use up too much energy, and they'll end up dying because, again, there's nothing out there for them to eat. They can't replace that energy. Then we have light hibernation. That's black bears. It's the common one we always think of with hibernation. But they are known to be out sometimes. In fact, just the other day, we had 2 people on the preserve see one of the bears there. And we have skunks, which I actually saw just the other day walking around, and raccoons. And those like I said, they'll kind of get up periodically on a nice day and go out, walk around, be active, and then just go in. But generally, most things are just trying to keep it calm. Then we have brumation, I mentioned before, and that's box turtles, black snakes, garter snakes, toads, everything like that. And really, any more snakes, toads, turtles you can think of, they will tend to essentially hibernate, but in a different way. It's not too much different, but it's different. Some of them will be underwater, things like that. One interesting thing I've noticed is around here, things like the painted turtle and snapping turtles, they won't necessarily hibernate in the way that others do. They will sort of just go underwater and not really breathe too much oxygen, and then just kind of live under there. Still decently active, sometimes out and about, walking around during winter, but not being too active. They just go underwater for a while, where it's more, again, where the temperature stays a little bit more constant and sometimes a little bit warmer. Then we have my favorite little overachiever. This guy's very cool. They're wood frogs. And they can freeze to the point of organ shutdown and survive. They just turn into an ice cube, thaw out, and then walk away. And once again, a little less common here. We don't get quite as cold, so they do go through freeze thaw cycles, but they still can. And the way they do this, if you look here, you have a frozen frog, and then they'll just wake up, look like that, walk away. So the way they do this is their liver will produce higher amounts of glucose in the blood, and they'll act as kind of an antifreeze, kind of cryoprotectant, which protect their organs from buildup of ice crystals, which would damage the tissue. So essentially, they can still freeze without the tissue actually gaining any damage, and that's what allows them to just walk away after. This to me is one of the most incredible stories. So just wanted to share that one with you. These ones are still local, and you can see them around. If you look, there are videos online. They're usually about 3 minutes long, and they'll just show you wood frog thawing out and being perfectly fine. Very cool to watch. Lastly, we have persistence. That one is very common here. As I've said, admittedly, we have relatively mild winters. It's seen a lot with predators because things like rabbits and squirrels and deer are, well, they also use this type of thing. They'll still be active in winter. So a lot of the time, things that prey on them will also be active because they don't have a scarcity of food. However, it is important to remember that, like everything, they do kind of slow down a little bit in winter because they're still trying to gain a little bit of energy, save what they can. So a lot of the time, this will include a change in diet. It'll decrease their activity, like I said, and sometimes they'll shift from more nocturnal to more diurnal habits. They'll be more active during the day than they usually are, just because the sun's out and it's a little bit warmer and more comfortable for them to move around. So again, some local examples of this, and you can trust me when I say that, because these were all taken in winter, all from Leesburg, and all just via game cameras. So we have deer, mice, coyotes, foxes. Here's a nice one. Bobcats sometimes. River otters, hawks, owls, squirrels. There's one down there, and wild turkeys. So river otters are one of the animals that I kind of mentioned where they will have more diurnal habits during the day. Deer, they will change. Deer and rabbits, things like that, will change to a more woody vegetation rather than leafy vegetation, because that's what's out. Like I said, you can see there are a lot of carnivores on this list. Not omnivores, but a lot of things that are eating the other things on this list. Squirrels, we know they like to cache away their nuts. And wild turkeys, they tend to kind of scratch on the ground for their food, and they'll kind of eat bulbs and things like that, and again, woody vegetation and just whatever they can find. So they tend to be pretty good at sticking around. So when you can't see any of these things, because as you may have noticed, is there some questions? Woody vegetation. That is, well, it's kind of just the smaller things like, low bush blueberry and things like that. They don't have any leaves on them anymore, but they'll kind of just chew on twigs essentially and survive off of that. They have other things like the caribou I mentioned before. They'll eat woody vegetation and also eat a large amount of lichen. So they kind of move around how they can, but hopefully that helped. It's just kind of smaller kind of twigs and things like that. Oh, sorry about that. If there's any other questions, you can go ahead now. Try to pay a little more attention. Matt. So as you probably noticed in that other slide, the majority of these, or half of these, were taken at night. So a lot of these animals will be hard to see during the day. It'll be kind of hard to find, but they are still around, and a lot of animals just don't like being around people. So again, they will be hard to find. But if you kind of pay attention to what they do and to what to look for to see if they're around, you can really see what was still there. And I still find it pretty interesting and pretty exciting to find just signs that something was there. Now, with all of the things we'll discuss here, they're good habits to get into to use for every single one of those. So every time you find some kind of sign, you want to note the size and the shape. With that, you want to take a picture with something next to it for reference. Doesn't matter what it is, just as long as you know what size that other thing is. You also want to note your surroundings. Are you in the woods? Are you in a field? Are you by a pond, a stream, a lake, anything like that? It's really important to notice that and to really take account so you can tell what exactly was there. Because if you're thinking it's one thing, but you're in a forest, that thing doesn't live in the forest, probably wasn't the thing you were thinking. And then just use your imagination. A lot of this will be sort of a guessing game, make it kind of fun. Then you're a detective, something like that, and just use your imagination around, know your surroundings, everything like that, and then just kind of guess at what happened. It'll make it sort of fun. So with that, what we'll discuss today are tracks, dens, dung, and feeding behaviors. With tracks, it can often be difficult to distinguish. We live in an area with a lot of ground cover and rocks and grass, everything like that. So it can be kind of hard to see, but on rainy days, it can be kind of nice. You can see get muddy and tracks will be a little bit more visible, especially on trails. And then other times in winter, it'll snow, and that makes tracks incredibly easy to find. Anything that's out, you'll see it. And when you do see it, it can give you a lot of information. It can tell you what kind of animal was there. It can tell you what it was doing, how it was moving. Like in this case, this was actually a dog that had slipped. It's hard to see. As you can tell, there's stuff around and it had just slipped, but there were also dog tracks leading up to it. And when you're there in person, you could kind of see that it was a dog track, but it can be hard to recognize sometimes, but it's kind of fun. You can just see something slipping and go, oh, mud gets all of us. So when you're looking at tracks, there's just a few tips to recognize a few of the major ones. And first, we have canine versus feline. So canine being, foxes, coyotes, your dogs, depends where you're walking, and feline, bobcats, house cats, not too much more. And what a lot of people will tell you to look for with that is canines have the claw marks, but I'm not a huge fan of relying too much on claw marks. They're kind of like trees when you look at them based on just the leaves. You take out an entire period of time there. So, and really, claw marks could be anywhere. The cats could still have claw marks. Maybe they had them out for some reason. Maybe there was just a rock there that got kind of nudged and it made it look like a claw mark, anything like that. So I want you guys to look at is the lobes up here. So canines will have one lobe on top and two on the bottom down there. And this will be just about any canine. And for felines, you'll have two lobes on the top and three on the bottom. One way a lot of people like to look at it is to say, if you can draw an X through these little parts here, then it's a canine. See, it works for both of them there. I'm trying to kind of draw an X, but if you try to draw an X through here, it doesn't quite work. It's a nice little way to remember it if you're ever unsure. Then we have ungulates. Really, the only kind of wild ungulate you'll see around here is a deer. In Virginia, we have feral hogs. Hopefully you don't see one. They are not supposed to be here. But if you do, you might see a track, and they're a little bit more chunky. Well, back parts here will be farther off to the side and just kind of a heftier track altogether. And then here you'll find the deer. That's a little bit closer together, kind of a dainty, we'll call it. And two little buttons there at the back will be straight back. There's one other type of ungulate that I can think of in Virginia, but there's literally only one place you will find it, and that is elk, because we're actively trying to restore the elk population in parts of Virginia. And there's one part, it is in southwestern Virginia, pretty much along the border of West Virginia, and on a reclaimed old coal mine. So you guys should really check that out. Actually, it's pretty interesting. I've been there myself, and it's a really interesting read if you look it up. All right, so then we have turkey, and it's these guys here. It's wild turkey. When you're walking along and you'll see these, you'll see a bird footprint that's about the size of your hand, and it kind of looks like a velociraptor walk through. A lot of the time they'll be walking along the trail too, because just like it's easier for us to walk on a trail, it's easier for them to walk on a trail. So you'll just kind of walk along with a little velociraptor, but that was in fact a wild turkey. We have bear here. Some people think it looks a little bit similar to a dog or something like that, but you can see it has 5 toes there, and it's generally much bigger. You can also tell that it has a different kind of front and back tracks there. Good question. So coyotes and foxes. Coyotes will tend to be a little bigger and kind of like a medium-sized dog, maybe a large dog. And foxes, they tend to be kind of smaller in general and skinnier. They kind of want to use the word dainty. You can always look them up. They have a lot of pretty helpful pictures online about it. But yeah, if you see a fox track, it'll tend to be the same as a dog track, just a lot skinnier and smaller. That helped. Yeah, bear prints, and then we have raccoon. I like to think these ones just kind of a splayed out little hand, just a little hand. And you also have the back feet there. Once again, kind of a little hand, just with a very long back part. And if it's not any of these or any other ones that you know, not really sure what you're looking at, it can often be pretty difficult. It's not going to be a perfect print every time. What you want to look for is the number of toes. So like I was mentioning with the bear versus, feline or canine or anything like that, it had 5 toes. They have 4. That'll kind of help. Uh, off the top of my head, I couldn't quite tell you what possum versus raccoon. I think possums tend to be a little bit less, or oh, actually, yes, I could. Possums, when you look at them, their thumb tends to be very obvious. So they do also kind of have the little hands, but if I remember right, they got pretty good grip. Like I said, I don't know everything in the world though. So yeah, look at the number of toes. Often too, if you can see the front and back feet, you want to check the number of toes on the front and the back, because that will make a difference. If they have 4 on the front and 5 on the back, that could mean a different type of animal completely. You also want to look at the shape of the foot. You know, is it like a bear or is it like a little hand? And like I said, if possible, find the front and back feet, because that will often help a lot. Yeah. Any other questions? If you want, you guys can unmute it if you have a question. It's fine. Okay. So tracks can also tell you what happened in an area. So they can tell you if it was running or walking. So in this case, it'll be pretty rare to see a set of tracks like this that'll be just perfectly walking along, because as I've said, we do have a lot of leaf litter and ground cover and stuff like that. So it does make it hard to find things like you would in a desert or just, in snow. But if you get lucky, you get in snow and there's just a really good set of clear tracks you can follow. You can see the pattern in which they were walking in the front and back feet where they land, and that can tell you what they were doing. So in the case of walking or trotting, the front and back feet kind of line up pretty well. Can tell you they were just kind of walking along. If they were loping or galloping, you can kind of see that they were doing one of these. And this is one of the ones where it kind of helps to use your imagination or just act it out yourself, where it just makes more sense. How does the movement work? Yeah, if you're lucky enough to see that, though, it's pretty cool when you can recognize exactly what they were doing from the pattern. Otherwise, you can see from one track. So in the case of a deer here, you can tell that this one had been running and this one had just been walking. Ways you can tell with that, it works with things other than deer too, but deer are the most obvious. So the way you can tell with that is that it's pretty splayed out and pretty deep. So when you think about it, when you're running, you really want to get as much power as you can. So you really want to spread out as much as you can, and then you're really gonna, push off the ground back there. So oftentimes, even if you just see one track, if it's splayed out and deep, it's because they were sprinting, trying to get away from something probably. Otherwise, you'll see tracks like this, where this one is also pretty deep, and it's probably just pretty muddy. But it's pretty even in there. It's not splayed out in the same way, so it's probably just walking along. You can also tell, just like the dog one, if it was slipping. So in this case, this was a deer that had slipped. Again, it's kind of hard to tell from the pictures, but you can look for yourself when you're trying to find tracks. This was actually 2 separate little deer tracks that had slipped together. That was pretty interesting. And again, they're kind of difficult to see sometimes, but this was a nice one. Also probably running. You can see between the leaves. You can find them. They're nice. It's a very nice thing to do on bad days, when it's just snowed or when it's just rained. It's a great time to go find some tracks. And we have dens. So these can often be very hard to spot and very hard to figure out exactly what was in them. What helps in spotting them is looking under dead trees, because oftentimes decaying roots will kind of leave a gap in the ground there. They can just get under them and clear it out, and it makes a nice little den for them. When you do find them, they can tell you the size of the animal relatively and the amount of time since the den was used. So if you look at these two, they are the same den, just one with a foot for scale. You can see this little mound here looks pretty fresh, whereas this one is very hard to see. and you can't quite see the mound. There's a bunch of stuff laying over it. So that one most likely is older. And oftentimes too, you'll see large holes in dead trees. The larger the hole, in this case, was for a bear. Black bears can climb, and they often do. They do actually like to den up in trees. Other animals like flying squirrels, they like to nest up in the top of decaying snags. And a lot of animals will take woodpecker holes. Even woodpeckers will use the woodpecker holes. Owls, they like to den up in holes in trees. So look out for those. Then you have ones like these. They're a little bit more obvious, and that would be just a deer bed. I swear a deer went into a field, thought this was a nice place to take a nap, and then it did. And you can kind of see it when it got up, and you'll just see kind of a generally pretty round indent in the grass. It's always kind of fun to see those. Then we have dung, also known as scat. This one we're focusing a little bit more on mammal scat because it gets a little more obvious here. As always, said it before, I'll say it again. Note the size and shape. That will always help a lot when trying to figure out what something is. Some tips for these ones: if you look at canines, you'll see they kind of have a tapered end. So you see the coyote has a little tapered end here, fox, a little tapered end, gray wolf, once again, a little tapered end. You probably won't see a gray wolf scat here. Then you have felines. They're a little bit more blunt and sectioned. So you see a bobcat, it's a little blunt section, mountain lion, blunt and sectioned. And vegetarians, they tend to have more pellets. That's where you want to look at the size and also the shape a little bit. See rabbits, they're a little bit more round, and they will definitely be smaller than a deer, which is, again, a little bit of a tapered end. But again, typically pretty round and just in different spots. And as you can see with the deer, elk, sheep, things like that, they tend to just drop pellets. And you have bears, which are typically very large, especially compared to the rest of them. And they're often filled with berries. I know a lot of people think about bears as eating salmon and everything like that, but bears really like berries and things like that. And you can often recognize that in their dung. So when in doubt, with that, just look at the contents. You can just take a little stick, break it up a little bit, see what's in there. Things like a fox or coyote that will have hair and bones in there, and you can pretty well bet that it wasn't a vegetarian to drop that if there's hair in it. Like I said, bear has berries and things like that. We'll talk about river otters. They like to have a lot of crawfish in there, and talk about that one in a second. And again, when you're in doubt, note the size, the shape, and look for a guide. You try to take a picture or something and just see maybe what was around. And with that, if you enjoy looking at this stuff, these pictures might end up in your phone. These ones in particular were in mine. This one I'm thinking is most likely a fox. Like I said, you see the little tapered ends. There's a lot of little hair in there, and it's pretty small. So similar to the tracks, foxes will be smaller than coyotes because foxes just are smaller than coyotes. So everything they do, if you shrink it down a little bit, most likely a fox. And over here we have river otter scat. This story is very important to look at your surroundings, and that was a nice kind of a way to talk about it because this is the same one before I kind of broke it up a little bit to see what was really inside it. You can see here it's little bits of crawfish. And then when I was looking around, there was a lot more little piles of this. It was right next to the river, and there was also a little slide right next to it. All things that are very common in river otters, I learned later. They like to pick their one spot to do their business on the side of the river, and they go back into their thing. They also like to have little slides to make it easier to just put back in the water. And like I said, a big part of their diet is crawfish. So you'll see that in their scat. So just remember, every time you're looking at it, you remember the size and just really be aware of your surroundings. If you're by a river, you're probably going to get signs of something that lives by a river. And lastly, we have feeding behaviors, and there are a lot of these. I won't get into all of them. This is just one of my favorites because it's such a little thing, but you can just look at one little twig and know what was there. And that is deer and rabbit. They both like to eat woody vegetation there. And but just by looking at one twig, you can tell what was there. And just by looking at a ripping and chewing look, chewed up look, it's most likely a deer. And then rabbits, they have these nice little pinches there, and they'll just clip the ends of them right off. They're very neat, so they have pretty similar looking diets, but if it's clipped off and neat, you can tell it was a rabbit. You also have different squirrels eat nuts in different ways, and then, like I mentioned earlier, wild turkeys, they like to kind of dig around in the ground to find their food. So if you see patches of dirt that kind of have been scratched at, it's most likely a wild turkey there. And there's a book I'll tell you about in a minute here that will actually go very detailed into different ways of tracking, including much of this type of behavior for a variety of different animals. And it's a very interesting one. I would recommend it. So this all interested you, and you want to go outside in winter now, or just in general, and go see if you can find any of these tracks or do anything like that. Some suggestions. One is just hiking, just take a walk. You don't have to do it with dogs. I know a lot of the time the dog might kind of scare off some of the wildlife you might be hoping to see, but while taking these two dogs for a walk, I actually saw 3 bears. So it is still possible to see some wildlife if you take the dog with you. And I will admit that this dog right here is a big part of the reason that I really like winter now. He's a winter dog, and he took me with him. But yeah, if you don't, it can make it a lot easier to really pay attention to surroundings. Maybe you sneak up on some things, you can see them a little bit easier. Either way, just take a walk outside and do some good. And there's journaling. So the next step in hiking, really. You just take a little journal, and it's really free form. You can do whatever you want, but really I've found that it just helps me to really pay attention to what you're seeing. You just write down anything and everything that you see. Maybe you take a picture, maybe you draw something if you don't know what it was. But you really just look at everything around you, make note of it, and it'll really kind of increase your interest in what was around you and what you've noticed. And in a lot of ways, it actually kind of helps you learn a lot of things too, just from observing them. And it's a nice one. I would suggest it. Then we have plaster casting here. And that is where you take a little bit of sort of cement and some water. You go out, you find a nice track, and you just fill it with that plaster cast and wait usually about 30 minutes. Then you'll have a nice little cast of a print there. It's a fun time. I would recommend it. One thing I will warn you from experience, don't do it when it's too wet outside because it will take forever to dry. And as much as I like sitting outside when it's cold, it's been upwards of 2 hours and you weren't expecting it, you start wanting to go home. But other than that, though, I would definitely suggest trying that out. So it's a fun little thing to have. Then we have bird watching. So again, you can do it anytime. This one I particularly enjoy. You just find a pair of binoculars and a field guide, and it'll start off a little bit frustrating, as most things do. But as you keep going, you learn more birds. The next thing you know, you start finding them everywhere and really paying attention and really enjoying yourself and learning a lot. So I know Loudon Wildlife, they do birding, they do walks with people. So they'd probably be a good group to go with if you're interested. Yeah, I would suggest that too. Really, any of these things are a good way to just get outside, get to know your surroundings, and maybe, hopefully in winter, just check out what you know. If you're interested in learning more and don't necessarily want to go outside, or you just want to read something, the Department of Wildlife Resources, Virginia, they have a really good website. You can look up pretty much any animal native to Virginia and a couple non, and they will just tell you about them, tell you some fun facts, where to find them, how to see them, stuff like that. The National Park Service had a very good article about the caribou herd and the management thereof and how humans kind of figure into the equation. So I would highly recommend reading that if you have a minute. Then All About Birds and the Merlin app. Those are both run by the Cornell Laboratories. They are fantastic for learning about birds. The Bird ID app will help you ID them. But All About Birds is what I use a lot of the time to just learn about any fun facts about them, really. Where they come from, what they eat, what they look like, and they have a lot of different sounds that they make. So you can really get familiar with what they sound like. Tracking and the Art of Seeing. That's the book I mentioned earlier, this one right here. That one really does go into very good depth about tracking and the art of seeing various different animals. That one, again, I would highly recommend if you're interested in learning anything about tracking. And Sibley Bird's Field Guides. Those are my personal go-to. They're my personal favorite. I like those ones. You're gonna probably want to get the eastern one. You go to the west, get the western one. I have that one too. But yeah, those are very helpful, especially just have with you outside while you're doing things, or if you maybe take a picture. And like I said, if you want any more recommendations or you have any questions, anything like that, I'd be happy to talk to you. Just shoot me an email there. I'll get back to you anytime. Are there any questions? Now we can open it up. You can talk if you like.
Hi. I have a question. You mentioned the park where where you can find elk. Do you remember the name of the park?
That I do not. It was not exactly a park. I kind of had to get a tour of it. Sort of an interesting place. But if you do look it up, you can really just look up elk in Virginia and it'll take you to that. It was very interesting. It was like I said, if you're looking for it, they'll probably mention that it was reclaimed mining land. Yeah, I don't know the name, sorry. Shit.
Do you consider coyotes a problem in the area?
Personally, not really. I'm a big fan of carnivores in any ecosystem. And since we no longer have wolves and a lot of those, I think coyotes just help to fill that void that we've created. They don't tend to eat as large of things, but I'm not sure if I actually mentioned this, but bobcats in winter, they will eat deer more often, and that's because of hunting season, where yes, I can. And it's because of hunting season where they'll kind of tend to get the ones that have been shot and got away and no one found them, or they've just been shot and got injured and again no one found them. So bobcats like to take advantage of that. I personally haven't seen many signs of bobcats. Yeah, to answer the original question, I personally like just about any carnivore, that type of thing. I think coyotes are actually kind of cool. And really the story of how they've expanded is also pretty interesting to me. Personally, I would prefer to have wolves still, but it's a wildlifer's point of view there. Bobcats in the area, I can't tell you too much about. I don't think they're super common to see. I know a friend of mine is pretty sure she saw tracks there on a preserve one time. But they are a little bit more elusive, and I don't think they're super common in this area. I know they don't tend to like places with a whole lot of humans and you know, suburbs and stuff. And I know a lot of about half of Loudoun and a lot of Fairfax, and the whole area here is it's a lot of humans there, so they kind of tend to avoid it a bit.
I just like to say thank you very, very much for taking us on this journey. I'm going to enjoy going into the wilderness so much more because now I'll know what to look for. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you. Glad you came.
Yes, thank you, Jacob. I agree. The more you learn, the more you're aware, the more you notice. I've been birding more myself, and I'm just learning more and more all the time.
Yeah, I'm always glad to hear that. It's just like I was saying earlier, if you know everything, it's not fun, you know. And it's the nice thing about wildlife and everything is you never know everything, and there's always something new to learn about something. It's always nice to just be able to go outside and know what you're looking for, and looking at, and maybe learn a little something. Every time you go outside, you're going to learn a little more something.
And for those in the area, I'm going to put a plug in for Banshee Reeks too, where we have the birding events there, and that's where Amy and Jacob work. So if you haven't been there, you need to go visit. It's fabulous, especially as springtime comes too.
Yeah. I actually love Banshee in winter. That's one thing I'll give. Is a lot of people. It's very nice in spring. It has a lot of wildflowers and it's beautiful, but something about it in winter. It's just very calm. It's nice. I can probably just about the PowerPoint. Would I be able to just send that to you and you can send it to people, or would you rather just? I know she said it's
we'll
recorded.
take care of getting you an email with the PowerPoint, a link to YouTube, and all the information that's here probably on this page too. So stay tuned for that. All right. Thanks everybody for joining. And thank you so much, Jacob.
Thank you, Jacob.
All right, everyone. Guys, have a good night.